Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Cropper here. Welcome to a first installment on a history of ancient civilization. This is going to be a pretty in-depth history, and it's going to be like on the grade of what you would get in a college class, but better because there will be less bunk. Now, in order to motivate you, because that's the first thing that has to be done anytime you're writing an essay or a chapter or a book or a lesson or whatever, you have to motivate your audience to pay attention. So in order to motivate you to study history and what ultimately becomes the development of civilization, in order to motivate you towards that, I've got a few things we'll need to say, and we'll just remember the motivation needs to run continuously throughout the speech or the lesson. So this isn't going to be like the first thing I motivate you and then we go on from there. These will be the themes that we'll be looking at, in effect. The past is present in all of our institutions of society, in our government, our laws, and our language. We all know that. That's one of the easiest reasons we should study the past, so that we know where all of our institutions came from. The Greeks, who began so many of the sciences that we have today, and we take them for granted. If we study the Greeks, we might be less inclined to take them for granted. They produced Herodotus and Thucydides, the fathers of historical inquiry. So as far as you know, what history writing was started by the Greeks. If we move forward into the Renaissance, we have other people obsessed with history, like Machiavelli, who gave us The Prince, and he was actually sort of compelled himself to write The Prince as a letter, of course, to the King Borgia, I believe, at a time when he was under house arrest or incarcerated. So he sort of, a leisure time was forced on him, and he finally was able to take to the pen, because he was a very active man, Machiavelli. So a study of history is what made Machiavelli's writings possible. All societies in the past crave to study history. The ones who don't crave to study history are like the Dark Ages, where they sit still for literally century after century after century. But any other society, besides the ones that are sitting still starving to death, a dynamic society, progressive society, studies history. It craves to study history and know what happened before and why. Now, history in written or civilized times is usually dominated by great names like Aristotle, Plato, Galileo, Newton, Pericles, Alexander the Great, Caesar, Napoleon, Bismarck, Hitler, Stalin. And I don't mean great names as in fantastic and good. I mean great names as in large, writ large across history. How many different motives they're all under. Aristotle and Plato are philosophers, Galileo and Newton are scientists, Pericles was a politician, Alexander the Great was a general, Caesar, Napoleon, Bismarck, Hitler, Stalin, all of these men and their motives and their desires and what they sought and what they accomplished, all of them is all encompassed in the study of history. Walt Whitman said, "Compared with the facts properly told, how mean is all romance." Meaning, how low, how boring, how base is all made-up fantasy compared with the facts of reality properly told. The facts of reality are more fantastic than anything you can make up. From Walt Whitman, just about the only thing I can approve of that he ever said. And Thucydides wrote his masterpiece, The History of the Peloponnesian Wars between Sparta and Athens, to help avert future war. So Thucydides saw the importance of studying history, not just as an end in itself or to understand your time, but to help prevent catastrophe in the future. So men without a history are like barbarians. Now, what is different about Western civilization? Because I'm going to concentrate primarily on Western civilization, as I believe any good initial introduction to history should concentrate on Western civilization. Well, there's a saying that kind of sheds light upon why Western civilization is the one to focus on. Now, it's fine to study China and India and wherever else afterwards, but to be introduced to history, you see, the introduction, the first course, has to be like, the basics. So this is why you study Western civilization, to get the basic ideas. Here's why. And there's a saying that shines some light on this that we can help here. Nothing is new in China. They had the arch bridge. I think they were making them only out of bamboo, but they had the arch way before Rome. They had, gunpowder, but they used it for fireworks, so that kind of counts, right? But they had printed paper money, 1,000 years before Europe even had printing. So they had the compass before Europe had the compass. They had everything. They had civil service exams. So nothing is new in China. What's different between China and the West is that when the West gets an idea, they're maniacs about it. It's called progress. They have a belief in progress. China doesn't have the belief in progress. Well, we're not talking the last 100 years now. We're talking throughout history, through thousands of years. China, compared to the West, doesn't have this idea of progress. So nothing is new in China shows the attitude China has. Things can be around, and they don't change the course of civilization. Civilization just plods along. So the West is demonstrably, historically different. Australia, the Americas, Asia, Africa, Europe, Rome, Greece. The most important civilizations of all time were Rome and Greece. You name all the civilizations across all the world, and those are the most important, ancient Greece and ancient Rome. You have to study those two, and then those will lead you to study Renaissance Europe. Those are the ones to get a knowledge of what mankind is about. What's the story of mankind? Time stands still in Africa, said a European visitor. I'm not sure who the visitor was. Time stands still in Africa, he says. Things don't happen. It's just the same all the time. So the West has the concept of progress. Now, David Hume, talking about the study of history, why it's important, if it's important, he says, to see the human race from the beginning of time pass in review before us, what a spectacle can be imagined so magnificent, so various, so interesting. So he says, it's just self-evident. It's magnificent to study history. So our history begins in the dim mist of prehistory, of ancient times, when the most enduring human efforts survive in the shape of stone tools. That's when we have to begin our story of ancient history. So here's our timeline, and the first thing we're going to look at is the age of the Earth. The Earth is about 4.5 billion years old. So let's call each notch a half billion years, 3.5 billion. So 4.5 billion years goes a little further than the end of our board. That's fine. 3.5 billion years ago is when the first microbial life started in the water. So we're going to call that life first occurred, and we're going to remember that the age of the Earth itself, when it condensed from interstellar dust and gas when the sun was forming, the beginning of the Earth's over here, then life. And here's us today. Now, after life first occurred, we have a long stretch before two cells got together. And that happened about 1.5 billion years ago. So all this area in here is single-celled organisms. It took that long for two cells to connect together, and then multicellular organisms just exploded. The Cambrian explosion, I believe, but that might not be the Cambrian explosion. It might be a different one. So that's about 1.3 billion years ago. That's fine. And then we have to go a long, long ways before we get to the point where we're going to skip way up to the dinosaurs, let's say. Let's see, 110. The dinosaurs ruled the Earth for about 200